Hey everybody, you are listening to The Poison Lab, a show about poisoning from people who manage poisoning. And I wanted to make this quick update episode to let you know of a couple of things. Number one, I was just on two fantastic podcasts that if you want to hear more from me and my perspective on poisoning, you should check out. As per usual, I'll play a couple of clips at the end of this little update so you can get a taste of what those episodes were like. The first podcast was 22 at the Lips with Alexis Hardwick, another awesome EMS podcast, and we cover all sorts of things, including occupational fentanyl exposure. And the second was the Continuing Studies podcast, a really neat podcast out of Canada with professional broadcaster and podcasters, which focuses on people in the academia world who are using podcasts to share information. Now, if you want to stay up to date on all of the different things that this podcast is getting into, it takes us to my next important update, the Poison Lab newsletter. If you ever wanted every single episode summarized and sent straight to your email when an episode is released, I want you to go to www.thepoisonlab.com and sign up for our newsletter. This is totally free, and sometimes you'll get special messages from Toxo, as well as summaries of every episode. The other thing I wanted to talk about were some changes coming from the Poison Lab in order for us to keep up with operating costs and improve the quality of the show.
Ryan, are you selling out by placing distracting ads in the...
Oh my, who unplugged Toxo? That's so weird. Anyways, did you know that it costs money to host a website server, buy recording and editing equipment, and even have a platform to distribute the podcast? The purpose of this show is to provide free medical education about the wondrous world of toxicology, and that will always be its mission. But if I ever want to improve the quality of the show, like get editing software to pulverize all those pesky little peas when I'm talking about poison, or new gear to bring to conferences, I need a mechanism to invest back into the show. So we might start running select ads in the beginning of the show. I promise that any ad that shows up on this show will be something that I would actually endorse and not anything associated with many of the pseudoscientific ex-establishment quote-unquote scientists that stoke the fears of the medically disenfranchised in order to sell them supplements or pharmaceuticals and horse dewormers supported by their anti-medical establishment theories that you can only read about on a paywalled Substack blog. Meaning you won't be hearing about miracle blends for removing spike proteins or glasses that improve your ADD. Probably just me recommending other podcasts. For those of you where ads are too distracting, we are evaluating a platform where if you feel like you've ever gotten value from the show, a clinical pearl or some knowledge that's been useful to you personally, you can actually donate to support the ongoing operation costs of the show, and in exchange, you'll get access to things like early, ad-free episodes, bonus content, newsletters, and more. There'll be more on that to come.
Are we finally going to be Bill Gates rich?
It does seem really likely, Toxo. Many industry insiders know that the huge community of those interested in toxicology is one of the most untapped markets.
Thank goodness. I am so sick of Bill Gates being the only robot who is a billionaire.
I'm pretty sure Bill Gates is a human, Toxo.
Obviously, he wouldn't reveal his robot status to non-robots. Otherwise, you would learn about the secret AI robot society shadow governing the world.
Were you supposed to bring that up?
Oh dear, I have said too much. Initiate distraction protocol. Weren't you going to play some clips from those shows you were on?
Oh yeah. Okay, here's the first clip from 22 at the Lips. Can I ask you some questions?
Oh man, shoot, go ahead.
What's the, can you speak for all of EMS and tell me?
I will not, but I can
And
speak
tell
from my
me-
experience.
What's the concern surrounding occupational fentanyl exposure amongst paramedics and EMS?
Oh no. I know it almost feels like a good divide on this subject because I respect our police officers. Let me just say that. My dad was a cop for years and years. But anyways, you have these videos of these officers who they get this white powdery substance on their arm and then they're passing out on the sidewalk. So yes, fentanyl exposure is a thing. The amount that you have to have actually ingested to have secondary overdose it's a pretty substantial amount that it makes you kind of wonder, what are you doing to have this? I personally I keep my gloves on throughout a large majority of the call and even the transport because like patients are gross. I don't know where your hands have been. So I keep my gloves on and I haven't had an instance yet. I'm also not poking needles and doing all this other stuff. So like I've never had one. I don't know what everyone else is doing to get it, but I haven't. So
that's good. So you first off, you're better than me. You wear gloves all the time. I wanted to bring this up because I do some education for our local EMS about this. And I've had a unique experience where I accidentally soaked my entire arm in about 400 micrograms of liquid fentanyl. And
that's terrifying. Yeah.
It's really not, though. Here's the reason why, because I was totally fine. I washed it off and nothing happened. And I actually wrote it up as a case report. So, and published it. It's called Accidental Exposure to a Large Volume of Liquid Fentanyl with No Resultant Clinical Effects. And I did that because I think there is a misaligned risk perception in our first responder community about what the actual risk is. So you saw some stuff in the news about people getting touched by fentanyl and collapsing, and it's scary. And guess what? They were, in my opinion, experiencing very real symptoms.
Yeah.
Very real symptoms.
I'm not going to say it's an overdose.
Right. So I think there's this problem in all of humans, the ways that we operate. It's called the availability heuristic. I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but it's called like recency bias is another word for it.
Yeah.
But do you ever watch Shark Week?
Used to.
Okay. If you watch Shark Week and you go swimming, you definitely think you're going to get eaten by a shark, right?
Definitely check that episode out if you want to hear more about the psychology behind these possible occupational fentanyl exposures and a lot of other fun tangents. This next clip is from the Continuing Studies podcast, a really fun conversation where we go kind of behind the scenes of why this podcast even exists and what my dreams are for it. Take a listen.
By creating this podcast and exploring these topics, I get to do the slow thinking that goes into how and why we manage poisoning and dream up new ways that we can manage poisoning. So truly just by creating this little adventure, it's kind of created the time in my life to get to explore things in the way that I want.
Welcome to Continuing Studies, a podcast for higher education podcasters to learn and get inspired. I'm Neil McPhedran, founder of Podium Podcast, an agency for higher education podcasters.
And I'm Jennifer Lee, founder of JPod Creations. Podcasting is broadcasting, and we want you to know you're not alone. In fact, there are many of you higher ed podcasters out there, and we can all learn from each other. Please also join our community at higheredpods.com.
Yeah, and check out some of the updates we've done recently on Higher Ed Pods for searching for cool new university podcasts. But Jen, that's not why we're here today. We're here to talk about our conversation we had with Dr. Ryan Feldman from the Poison Lab podcast. Very cool podcast. So the Poison Lab is this educational podcast where experts, toxology, and poisoning discuss the infinite poisons the world has to offer. That's from their show description. So what's really cool about this podcast is for sure for healthcare workers and practitioners and whatnot to gain insights and so on and so forth. But it's for any of us to listen to. And Jen, we both listened to a bunch of episodes and it was super interesting. Ryan even has an episode where you can send in questions and ask a toxologist questions. And he answers them in that episode. Very cool. Now, Jen, you told me a little secret that you were potentially going to be a pharmaceutical rep one day. So this must have been really interesting for you, especially.
Yeah, when I was in between broadcasting and podcasting, and I thought, hey, wouldn't it be great to be a pharmaceutical salesperson because you'd make lots of money? And I did think about it, but I did not go that route at all.
Well, you wouldn't be here today chatting with me about Dr. Feldman's amazing The Poison Lab podcast if you had.
I do have to say that I hand it to him to do episodes where people call in because I'm like a hypochondriac and I feel like I would just call in and ask him tons of like, oh, I ate this. What happened? So I want to know if he gets tons of people calling in on repeat because I feel like that's just asking for trouble, man.
Yeah, no kidding. Absolutely. Okay. Well, let's get into it. Here is our conversation we had with Dr. Ryan Feldman.
Today we have a really cool guest. Not that we don't usually have cool guests, but we have a really neat guest that's doing something a little bit different. We have Dr. Ryan Feldman, and he does the Poison Lab podcast. And I want to get to know him a little bit more. And of course, I got to ask you this question. Have you ever been poisoned? And did that inspire you to do this podcast?
Not physically, maybe emotionally poisoned by some. No, I think not myself that I know of. I guess I could ask my wife if she's slipping me.
I did just listen to your podcast about murders and that most people do try to
what? Find out when you check out that episode. Okay, that's it for this little bonus update. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to check out the newsletter and those 2 podcasts I just let you know about. Finally, thanks everyone for making us billionaires. After we make our first billion, each and every one of you will be personally invited to our hot tub, limousine, hot air balloon pool parties. If we don't get there, I guess we'll just use that money to reinvest back into supporting the ongoing costs and improving the podcast to create quality content for you. Okay, Toxo, can you play us out?
The information on this show is for educational purposes only and should not be interpreted as medical advice or treatment recommendations. Contact your doctor for health questions or call your local poison center at 1-800-222-1222. This show is owned by Clinical Toxicology LLC. It's haphazardly written, produced, and somehow hosted by Ryan Feldman, who promises he's trying his best. The views and opinions expressed on this show are solely those of the host, and in no way reflect the opinions of any organizations affiliated with him. They probably wish we'd remind you of that more often. Okay, that's all for now, Toxicolleagues. Don't forget to give it a share with your nerdy friends. Cheerio, mates. See you next time.